Today on Passion for Food, I'm going to show you why I'm such a lo maniac for this delicious beef lo mein. But more than that, I'm going to share with you the secret that Chinese restaurants and takeout places use to get their meat so soft and tender, and it's super easy. So let's go ahead and jump in here and get started. And to start with here, I decided to expand my pasta abilities by making the pasta by hand. And for that, we're going to need about 2 cups of all-purpose flour, along with 1 teaspoon of salt. You can see I measure that super duper carefully. You can definitely just use store-bought pasta, but I thought, hey, I'm doing this for the internet. They're not tuning in to watch me take things out of a box. Besides, isn't it pasta time to learn how to do this by hand? And by hand, I mean with this giant machine, because I'm lazy. Anyway, we're going to drizzle in some water here, and I can't tell you exactly how much water because, honestly, I have no idea. Well, okay, not no idea. It's generally going to be between 1/2 and 3/4 cup of water, but it's really much easier if you just drizzle the water in and wait to achieve the right texture. Ultimately, we want to add just enough water to get this to form into a ball. It should be more or less the texture of Play-Doh. It should be a little bit firm and not sticky. If you're using a stand mixer like I am, once it starts to clump up like this, you're going to want to switch to your dough hook attachment. And I'm going to use my patented give it a quick poke technique to see if it needs a little more water. And it did, so I'm going to drizzle in probably just about another 1.5 teaspoons of water, and that's all I needed to get this to come together into a nice smooth dough ball. We can see it's nice and soft, but it's not sticking to our fingers at all. That's exactly what we want. And here's a little bonus secret for you. You actually want to continue to knead this pasta dough for another 2 or 3 minutes, just like you would a bread dough to develop that gluten structure. What that will get us is a slightly chewier noodle with just a little bit of stretch. It really does make a big difference. I highly recommend not skipping this part. So even though I'm going to be cutting these like Italian noodles, this dough would work just fine for the slap and stretch Chinese method as well. So after about 3 minutes, we'll go ahead and pull our pasta dough out of here, and you can see it's gotten a whole lot smoother. It's a little hard to see on the camera, but it should feel kind of silky in your hands compared to before. And lastly, we do want to just cover this in plastic wrap and let it sit and rest for at least 20 or 30 minutes. Resting both allows the flour to fully hydrate and for those gluten structures which we've developed to relax just a little bit, which will make the final rolling and shaping a bit easier for us. Now, we could easily store that for up to a couple of days in the fridge, but I'm just going to stash mine on the counter to rest while we move on to the real secret to this lo mein magic, which is something I'm going to call double velveting. And our super secret mixture is going to consist of 1 tablespoon of cornstarch along with 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Yes, I said baking soda. I'll explain more about that in just a moment, along with some salt and pepper to taste, or of course other seasonings of your choice. And I'm just going to give that a quick mix before I add about a tablespoon or so of this garlic chili sauce. This really counts as a seasoning, but I really love that garlic chili sauce, so I love putting some in there. And finally, we have 1 whole egg. Now, most of the single velveting techniques I've seen call for just using the egg whites, but I consulted a professional Chinese chef friend of mine, and they told me that that mainly has to do with the fact that the yolk can make the color a little darker, and that might be undesirable, especially if you were doing something like velvet chicken. But in this case, we're not, so I'm just going to leave that yolk in there. It's super tasty and nutritious. Anyway, let's get cracking and beat that egg until everything is smooth, and then it's time to prepare our beef. The cut of meat we use isn't super critical. I've got some eye of round here, but what you do want to look for is the grain structure. It really does help if you see the grain running from one side to the other like that. And this cut had a good bit of fat on one side. For a lot of things, I'd like that, but for this, I don't. So I'm going to go ahead and trim most of this fat off. And the other little secret to making cutting this easy is to do it when it's about, I'd say, 2/3 the way frozen. Oh my gosh, so many different secrets in this video. And the size of the pieces we wind up cutting is not as critical as the fact that we cut against the grain. That's really what you want to focus on. You want to make cuts across the grain of your meat just as thin as you can reliably get them. They don't all have to be perfect, but it definitely helps if they're around the same size. And for the amount of magic marinade that we've made, we want between 12 and 16 ounces of meat. You can scale that up if you want to do 2 pounds of meat, just double the amount of that magic marinade. And this technique is definitely not exclusive to beef. It will work with any protein. Anyway, let's keep this recipe moving and get our beef tipped into this magic marinade. And while we're getting this all mixed together, making sure that marinade is coating every single piece, let's talk for a moment about what's happening here and why this works the way it does. I'm calling this a double velveting technique, but I guess more accurately what we're doing is velveting and tenderizing at the same time. That egg and cornstarch is the actual velveting component that gives it a silky, smooth texture on the outside. And then we have our baking soda, and what that's going to do is actually raise the pH level on the surface of the meat, which actually changes its chemistry a bit as it cooks, which prevents the meat proteins from being able to bond together quite as much. Which means as it cooks, the meat doesn't tighten up and get as tough. You get nice, tender meat. It works amazingly well. The only catch is it really only works on thin cuts of meat like this, as the baking soda isn't able to penetrate a larger cut of meat. But just like our pasta dough, we want to cover this and let it sit for at least 15 to 20 minutes. So while those are doing that, I'm going to go ahead and start preparing our lo mein stir fry. And I like using about a tablespoon of this toasted sesame oil. It really adds an awesome nutty flavor. Along with another tablespoon of a more neutral tasting oil. That sesame oil can be overwhelming if you use too much. And as we give our wok a little shake, you should be able to see the oil shimmering just slightly. That's how you know it's hot enough. So we'll go ahead and add 1 large sliced onion, along with half a head of sliced cabbage and about 1 medium carrot julienne. And we want to stir fry this over high heat for a few minutes until we get some caramelization on our onions and cabbage and everything starts to soften up a little. So while we keep an eye on that, let's go ahead and get our pasta ready. And if you're doing the box thing, which is nothing to be ashamed of, this would be a good time to get a pot of water boiling. I like to coat mine in just a little flour. You can see it's nice and soft and smooth there. And I like cutting mine into about 8 equal pieces like that. At which point we're just going to form these into rough rectangles with our hands. And then we can go ahead and get this rolled out to the thickness that we like. Personally, I'm using setting number 4 on this thing, which I would describe as standard noodle width. And then we can go ahead and cut this into whatever shape we would like. Personally, I prefer the thinner noodles, but my wife actually prefers the wider noodles, so we compromised and went with the wider noodles today. And once we get all of this beautiful wheat pasta cut the way we like it, we want to go ahead and whisk this off to a pot of salted boiling water. And fresh pasta is not like dry pasta. It doesn't take much time at all to cook, probably a minute or 2 max. A general rule of thumb I like to use is once the water comes back up to a boil, your fresh pasta is ready. So we want to pull that off immediately and drain. And to prevent the noodles, especially fresh noodles, from getting overcooked, we just want to spray these down real quick with cold water. That will both halt the cooking process and wash off a little of the external starches, which will help prevent them from sticking together too badly when we stir fry them here in just a minute. So now that our onions, carrots, and cabbage have had a minute to caramelize, I'm going to go ahead and add 1 bunch of green onions and about 5 cloves of minced garlic. And we'll give all that a good toss just to get those aromatics working. And you can see here what I mean about caramelization. You definitely want to see those brown bits. And we just want to continue stir frying this on high for another minute or two, at which point we're going to add about a 1/4 cup of soy sauce, along with 1 cup of either beef or chicken stock. Now, I know that might seem like a lot of liquid, but trust me, because of the magic of that double velvet marinade, you do want all of that in there. Anyway, as we cook this on high, let's get everything mixed together. And the fragrance really will be great. Anyone who happens to be walking on by will definitely wonder what you have cooking. And that cornstarch in our velvet marinade is actually going to be pulling double duty here. Not only helping to create that velvety texture on our beef, but it's also going to thicken as everything cooks, helping to create the sauce that's going to coat our noodles. And speaking of, once our meat is cooked through, we want to go ahead and toss those in. And get canoodling with our noodles. We really just want to toss this with the meat and vegetables until the noodles are coated with that sauce and serve immediately. So let's waste no time plating up oodles of these beautiful noodles. And we'll give this beautiful beef lo mein a try. And to add a little extra color and freshness, we'll just top this with another handful of green onions. But that's it. The real secret to this recipe and others like them is that double velveting technique. If you've never tried that, you really should. It's a game changer. It's hard to really show you tenderness on camera, but this meat really is just falling apart. It is soft, tender, and amazingly delicious. You can see it just pulls apart with basically no resistance at all. An eye of round is not exactly a tender cut of meat. People will be swearing that this is like premium Wagyu beef or something, but you'll know better. It's that secret double velvet marinade. So what foods are you most passionate about? Let me know in the comments below. I really hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Passion for Food. If you have, give me a thumbs up below and consider subscribing and hitting that little bell so you don't miss our future episodes. This has been Graham with Passion for Food.